The Fundamentals of Ideology and Politics. Regular Political Education. Volume I. People's Front for Democracy and Justice. Central Office, Asmara, Eritrea. January 2006. Special thanks. We would like to take the opportunity to thank the PFDJ Head Office for continuous support in producing the materials for this document and the NACDC team for translating the book. Contents. Introduction 7. The meaning of ideology 10.2 The necessity and role of ideology 16.3 The meaning of politics 24 The necessity of politics 25.1 Politics as an art of cooperation 26.2 Politics as an art of distribution of power 27.3 Politics as process of building and developing common interest 28.4 Politics as a source of common understanding and consent 28.5 Politics as process of the public participation in power 29.6 Politics as a tool of change and progress 29.7 Politics as a tool of conducting international relations 38 Politics as an instrument of struggle 31.5 The relationship between ideology and politics 32.1 Vision and program 32.2 Values and policies 33.3 Theory and organization 34 Summary 34.6 The importance and role of ideology and politics in nation building 36.7 The importance and role of ideology and politics during the Eritrean Revolution for Liberation 39.8 The importance and role of ideology and politics in building modern Eritrea 43 Importance and role of ideology 43 The importance and role of politics 46.9 The necessity and objective of political education in independent Eritrea 52 Definition of political education 52 The necessity of political education 55 The objectives of political education 56 Conclusion 60 Introduction. This is the first book of the regular political education that is starting to be presented to members of the People's Front for Democracy and Justice, PFDJ, in post-independence Eritrea. Political education was one of the weapons the EPLF used to achieve victory. In fact, it can be stated that, with the EPLF, political education was like a daily ration of food. Unfortunately, political education was neglected in the post-independence years. There was minimal regular political education. The negative and damaging consequences of this neglect are now clear. As a result, we have been reminded again of its significance. Though we are starting to provide political education late, we are certain, if we work seriously and increase our efforts, we can make up for what we have missed. The first topic, ever since formal political education began during the national struggle for independence more than 40 years ago, had always been a topic that explained why it was necessary to learn and know political education, and the objectives and benefits of political education. The topic of discussion was the objectives and necessity of political education. The reason for this was that it was important to first understand why it was significant to have political education before delving into substantial detail. As in any other subject, unless the necessity, objectives, benefits, and services of political education were recognized and acknowledged by its intended audience, it cannot be productive. That was the reason why the first topic was called the objectives and necessity of political education. It is also important that we start our regular political education with this fundamental topic at this time. Therefore, our first topic, though it is different in depth and vocabulary, will be a topic whose goal is to explore the basic necessity, objectives, contents, and roles of political education. The title will be Fundamentals of Ideology and Politics. This topic might be confusing at first sight. We might also feel that the concepts of ideology or politics are difficult to decipher. We might also think, from a distance, that they are complicated terms beyond our comprehension. Some of us are even tempted to shelf the topic as something that doesn't concern us and not worth learning. However, is this the reality? 8. A man is part of his community. He is born into and raised in a family. He learns languages, values, traditions, beliefs, and rituals from his family and surroundings. In a nutshell, he learns culture and is nurtured by culture. When and if he gets an opportunity, he acquires more knowledge and skills, as conditions permit, by receiving formal elementary, secondary, or higher education. He is cultivated in culture and history in order to serve his country. He acquires skills and begins to lead his life by working. His life is determined by social and national conditions. These could be governments, political systems, laws, economies, services, and employment opportunities. He participates in the activities of his country and on his part starts a family and takes the responsibility for his children. There are societal cultures and governmental laws that govern all of these relations. There are also social controls and enforcement mechanisms to punish, reprimand, and correct anyone who opposes and trespasses these cultural norms and laws that are designed to make a society maintain an orderly and stable existence. Overall, since man is a social being interdependently living with others, there is no society that exists without traditions, values, beliefs, views, myths, laws, or customs. Let's go back to the issue at hand. What can we learn about ideology and politics from the short account we gave on societies, cultures, and laws? In relation to what we had discussed above, we can present the following simple and preliminary meanings of ideology and politics. Ideology is the values, beliefs, views, and customs a society uses to express and secure its existence. On the other hand, politics is the process and authority by which a society governs itself. In short, ideology can be associated with values and beliefs, and politics with government and laws. As we will see in detail later in this book, ideology and politics are concrete concepts directly related with people's lives, not abstract and remote concepts. Because of these, we realize that having an interest in ideology and politics is fundamentally related to our lives, with the capacities and abilities to attain our objectives and aspirations, with the understanding of our problems and their solutions, and with the progress of our lives and future. As a result, it is wrong to assume that ideology and politics are abstract concepts that they do not concern us. Therefore, it is necessary and useful to start our political education with this topic. 9. In this book, we will discuss the role of ideology and politics in nation building in general, and the necessity and objectives of political education in independent Eritrea in particular. 10. 1. The meaning of ideology. Under this topic, the first question that comes to everyone's mind is the question, what is ideology? This is a question that tries to get to the meaning of ideology. This is important because without having a clue on what ideology is, we cannot discuss about the need for ideology and its role. It is thus helpful to start with this question. Even though ideology is a complex concept, understanding and explaining its fundamentals, however, is not as difficult as it looks from a distance. Since the role of ideology in our daily lives is a concrete phenomenon, it is possible to present its fundamental essence in a simplified manner. It is also easier to present this fundamental essence using examples. Therefore, we will proceed to give examples that will help us explain the meaning of ideology. Let's explore our history to get some useful examples. For the past 100 years the Eritrean people had suffered under the continuous rule of 3 colonial powers. These colonial forms of domination were based on force and violence. The instruments of this force and violence were their armies, police, and security forces. On top these forces of coercion, they also had administrative, judicial, educational, information and health institutions designed to help them stabilize their rules. However, colonialism couldn't have survived by force alone. To ensure its stronghold it had to employ other instruments as well. For instance, Italian rule in Eritrea was not only based on military force. For a longer part of its stay and parallel to its military campaigns, the basis of its rule were also subtle ideas and non-coercive institutions. One can overpower and subdue a population by sheer force, but only for a short while. To ensure a longer stay, it has to find a way of making it acceptable by the population. The Italians, like all other European colonialists, tried to impress upon the Eritrean population that the Italians, as a superior race, were entitled to rule, and Eritreans, as an inferior race, were not capable of self-rule. Like all other colonial subjects, they had to accept Italian rule. To make this racist idea sustainable and to give it a concrete form and life, they established administrative, legal, educational, and 11. Cultural institutions. Unfortunately, those ideas and institutions had some influence on the Eritrean population. Italian rule was able to continue peacefully for many years. That idea, designed to serve Italian colonial rule, was advocating Italian and white superiority on one hand, and the inferiority and backwardness of Eritreans and Africans on the other. It was masking oppression and injustices and justifying them. That racist and colonial idea that attempted to get compliance and stability by presenting the system as legitimate and natural, is essentially an ideology. Italian colonialism, like every European colonialism of its time, had a colonial ideology designed to serve its interests at the expense of the Eritrean population. On the other hand, at that time the Eritrean people didn't have a coordinated national and anti-colonial ideology that effectively challenged Italian colonial rule and served its interest and aspirations. As a result of these, resistance to Italian rule was fragmented, disorganized, and limited to few individuals and groups. In short, it was not effective enough to conduct a national liberation struggle. That being the general case, we shouldn't forget that the more than 50 years of Italian colonial rule and oppression was received with a lot of bitterness and resentment as well. This was particularly true among those who were in the cities, serving with the Italian colonial army or under other colonial institutions. It has to be noted it was a stage, albeit slowly, when the desire for liberty and equality was growing and the seed of national consciousness was planted. The second colonial rule in Eritrea was that of the British. That colonial rule didn't get a chance to stay for long. It was a short-lived one that surfaced during the transitional period between Italian and Ethiopian rule. However, it was also a rule best remembered for its ideology of divide and rule. British colonialism, as an experienced and strong imperial power with colonial rule covering the globe, had a developed colonial ideology. An example of this colonial ideology is how it tried to conspire to serve its own interest and that of its allies at the expense of Eritrea. It tried to partition Eritrea into two, part of Eritrea going to Ethiopia, and the rest to the Sudan, which was under British colonial rule at the time. It is also to be remembered how it tried to foment division and friction in 12. The guise of political liberty in order to make its idea of partition a reality. The time of British colonialism was also a period when Eritrean national consciousness and struggle took its first steps. During that time, even though the idea Eritreans as one and united people deserved our right to self-determination and self-government had emerged, there were several people who didn't support it. In other words, as an idea it was still in its infancy. In other words, even though there was a British conspiracy to derail it, it was also beset with the ills of religion, regionalism, and factionalism. It can be said that during that time, even though there were signs of it, there was no mature national ideology that could effectively challenge British colonial ideology and one that could spearhead the struggle for an independent Eritrean government, serving the interests of the Eritrean people. The third colonial rule in Eritrea was that of the Ethiopians. Ethiopian colonialism was different from that of the Italians and the British, in the sense that it was based on a backward feudal expansionism. Though no one could excuse the two European colonialisms for the oppression and degradation they brought upon the Eritrean population, it cannot be denied that they had also exposed the Eritreans to modern ideas and new ways of life. The ideological and cultural oppression of European colonialism had left psychological and cultural scars on the Eritrean population. Fortunately, those scars did not go deep to the extent we see in other societies that have lost hope in themselves and caused an inferiority complex. They didn't severely impede the anti-colonial struggle in Eritrea. After Ethiopia occupied Eritrea, first under the guise of the federal arrangement, and later openly through forceful annexation, it tried to consolidate its colonial rule using an ideology designed to serve the interests of a few feudal lords and members of the royal family. That ideology was one based on a myth of 3,000 years old history, which was an outdated ideology that didn't give any room for modernity. That ideology, even though it had a limited influence through the support of the Orthodox Church and the Unionist Party, it was not able to match and impede the progress of the Eritrean national consciousness and the struggle for independence that initially started in the 1940s and grew noticeably in the Federation years of the 1950s. Unlike that of Italian. 13. Colonialism. Ethiopian colonialism was given neither time nor opportunity. It was challenged as an illegal and unjust occupation right from the very beginning. Ethiopian colonial ideology didn't get acceptance in Eritrea, both in its feudal and socialist forms. It is to be remembered that the Derg was pretending to follow a socialist ideology, an ideology of social justice and equality it declared to gain public support, but had no commitment for it. In short, Ethiopia was not able to rule Eritrea peacefully, other than by using raw force. Our history is a vindication of the importance of a national ideology which enabled us to defeat Ethiopian colonialism in a long struggle that commenced in the 1940s, even though it entailed many difficulties and sacrifices. This anti-colonial idea for rights and liberty, for nationalism and unity, had required lots of sacrifices and a long struggle to mature, to be enunciated clearly, and to gradually permeate into the psyche of the population. In the 1940s, the idea that Eritreans, as a united people with a common interest and destiny, have the right to an independent government was new and not firmly established. The idea was met with hostility by the colonialists of the day, but it also had faced obstacles and opposition from some Eritreans. In addition, it was not yet a coherent and developed idea. As the nationalists who initiated the idea started to gain more experience in the process of the struggle, they began to develop their organizational skills and ideas as well. By 1950, these nationalists were able to form the independence bloc. The national idea then started to grow and mature, as it began to get the acceptance and trust of many Eritreans, particularly the youth, students, and workers. The idea progressed further with the establishment of the Eritrean Liberation Movement, ELM, at the end of the 1950s, and with the launching of the armed struggle by the Eritrean Liberation Front, ELF, even though the latter was beset with major internal problems in the 1960s. The national consciousness grew by fighting against colonialists externally on the one hand, and internal weakness and obstacles on the other. During the journey of the armed struggle, Eritrean nationalism evolved from an immature and fragmented idea into a mature, well-organized, unified, and coherent ideology. In the 1970s, the ideology of Eritrean nationalism, coupled with the ideology of social justice, got the chance to gain breadth and depth, when it got a solid political force that represented it in the Eritrean People's Liberation Front, EPLF. The EPLF fought against colonial powers not only to 14. Secure national independence, but also to establish a progressive society built on the ideology of social justice and equality to fight all forms of oppressions and discriminations. The EPLF pursued a national ideology of social justice and came out victorious as a united and strong front that represented the interests of the Eritrean people. In this history, the national ideology of social justice proved to be a potent weapon used to defeat Ethiopian colonialism and one that served the interests and aspirations of the Eritrean people. In short, we saw from our own history how, on one hand, successive colonialists had colonial ideologies that were designed to consolidate their rules over the people of Eritrea and to serve their interests, and on the other hand, how Eritrean nationalists developed a successful ideology of social justice that challenged the ideas of colonial ideologies, and successfully served and represented the interests and aspirations of the Eritrean people. Based on these examples, we can now give a short answer to the question that we started with: what is ideology? Ideology is the collective ideas and beliefs that a society, government, or political organization uses to explain that its interests and objectives are right, just and invincible. To elaborate more on this definition, we present the following examples. The relationship between a society and ideology can be compared to the similarities or the relationships that exist between a computer and the program that runs it. A computer, the hardware is worthless without the software that runs it. The hardware in itself, without software, is not complete. In other words, the concrete is not complete without the abstract. Similarly, societies, economic and political systems are not complete without an ideology. Ideology, thus, is the abstract power of ideas that drives a society, by creating unity and organization. There are some fundamental questions that human beings seek to find answers for within their societies. Ideology grows in the process of answering these questions. Some of the questions that ideology tries to answer are the following: what does an ideal society look like and is it attainable? Which lifestyle is suitable for human beings, enabling them a 15. Wholesome and satisfactory living. How should the economic, political, cultural, social, and private life of people be organized and administered? How can the spiritual and material needs of people be met? Can people attain a state of absolute liberty, where they can satisfy all their needs? The difference in ideologies is based on how they answer these and similar questions. History is full of different ideologies that often contradict each other. Since ideology is an expression of interests and aspirations, and there are differences in interests and aspirations, and conflicts in every society and between societies, it is natural to have differing and contradictory ideologies. The difference between ideologies is reflective of which interests and aspirations they represent. We find that while some are progressive, serving the interest of the people and justice, others are reactionary, serving the interests of the few. Our modern world is full of several differing and conflicting ideologies. However, modern ideologies fall in one of the following three broad categories. These are: first, conservative ideology, one that wants to preserve the current system. Second, reformist ideology, one that wants to gradually improve the current system. Third, revolutionary ideology, one that wants to uproot the current system and replace it with a new system. As examples of these modern ideologies, we can mention liberalism, nationalism, socialism, fascism, imperialism, racism. 16. 2. The necessity and role of ideology. As we were explaining the definition of ideology, we had indirectly hinted at the necessity and role of ideology. In this modern world, an organization or government cannot be secure, powerful, and competitive, without an ideology. As ideology lays the ground for a nation to know where it came from, where it is now, and where it is heading, its necessity is fundamental. A nation that hasn't developed an ideology to serve the interests and aspirations of its citizens, is like a ship being tossed by a storm in the middle of an ocean, without a map, a compass, or a captain, and doesn't know where its harbor is, and in the end, it ends up breaking up and going down or sinking. An ideology is significant for the following three reasons. First, it gives a society a cohesive understanding of its origin, history, and customs, thereby helping it explain and understand where it came from. It also helps it lay a ground that enables it to build a society free from dependency, by making it to be self-confident, self-reliant, and one that clearly knows its identity. Second, it directs a society to see its current conditions, internal capacities and shortcomings, opportunities and obstacles, the challenges and problems it has to face, and the surrounding forces and their consequent pressures. By this, it gives it a broad understanding of its current conditions and future directions. In short, it helps it build a common understanding. Third, it gives a society a clear guide where it needs to go, it inspires it to dream accomplishing big, it urges it to have big ambitions, and to continually improve and enrich its life. In short, it sharpens its vision. In general, the need for ideology is critical, for it secures a coherent understanding of the past, present and the future. To elaborate on this further, let's consider the following example. Take a person who is lost in an unfamiliar big city. Unless this person has a map of the city and knows where he is and where his destination is, he cannot reach where he wants to arrive at. Unless he has the address of where he is trying to 17. Reach, not only will he fail to know where he is, he will also fail to arrive at his destination. In other words, he will be completely lost. We can take ideology to be like a map that helps you know where you are and serves you as a guide to reach your destination. It is also helpful here to look at an example from our own history. At the beginning, the idea that said Eritrea should be independent was a nascent idea advocated by few people. Gradually, the idea got the acceptance and support of many. Even though it took a long struggle, the Eritrean public began to accept and follow it, because it was a reflection of its interests and aspirations. On the other hand, Ethiopian colonialists tried, with all of their might, to kill this idea because it ran against the grain of their own interests. They tried to weaken and defeat this Eritrean nationalist idea by spreading misinformation like, Eritrea doesn't have a history that is distinct from that of Ethiopia. Eritrea doesn't have the capacity to be self-sufficient. Its people are not united, however, because the nationalist idea had rich and broad thoughts concerning history, economy, politics, culture, strategy, organization. It gained strength and developed into a successful ideology of Eritrean nationalism and social justice that permeated the Eritrean public, was able to lead the national independence struggle into victory. In this respect, we observe how an idea that only few people believed in at first matured into a successful idea the whole population accepted and was ready to sacrifice its life for. This example illustrates how when an ideology is widely received by a population, it can be transformed into a big force for change, and can be used to make history. It also teaches us that an ideology limited to the domain of a few cannot bring about change. To be effective, an ideology has to be accepted and adopted by the people, and the public has to have a confidence in it. In other words, an idea that is embraced by the public beyond the few who conceived it, and an idea that is used as a foundation for a strong organizational structure, can make history by becoming a dominant ideology. A nation that managed to develop a successful progressive ideology of social justice can secure the following values. 1. Social harmony between different sectors of society such as urban and rural, rich and poor, male and female, different cultural and religious. 18. Groups. This secures a social harmony and cooperation, based on equality and justice. 2. National common understanding of national principles, beliefs, and institutions accepted and defended as sacred national foundation by all citizens. This helps secure and cultivate national unity and compliance. 3. Cultural identity, psychological strength, and confidence. A society that has no confidence in its identity and is devoid of psychological power cannot achieve much. Ideology helps in building a society that has a solid psychological makeup, a population that is aware and proud of its own identity, a society that has confidence in its own human capacity, and a population that has no doubt that it is capable of accomplishing big goals, and of making history. The national ideology of social justice, as a successful ideology, has secured the Eritrean people the above-mentioned 3 values. The attainment of these values is not a guarantee that they will be everlasting. There is a possibility of reversal. It requires a continual ideological struggle and a political, economic, and cultural effort to maintain, invigorate, and strengthen them on a continuous basis. Before we conclude this topic, it is essential that we discuss the role of ideology in the history of a society. As we saw earlier, ideologies differ on the basis of the interests and aspirations they represent. Accordingly, we find their role in society to be differing and conflicting. History has witnessed on one hand the emergence of a progressive ideology and movements that were guided by it. This ideology stood for social justice, for the interests of the public, for prosperity and justice, for liberty and democracy. It contributed ideas on how people could better their lives in fraternity and friendship. It also laid the ground for people to organize and struggle in order to create a better society. In short, it is a constructive and positive ideology, advocating social justice. On the other side, we have also witnessed the emergence of a reactionary ideology and movements that exalted it. This ideology stood for narrow interests, exploitation, aggression, and wars that served the interests of colonialism and imperialism. It sowed the seeds of violence and destruction. It reigned over hate and fear. In a word, it was an ideology that played a destructive and negative role in societies. It was a reactionary, as well as aggressive. 19. Ideology. This shows us that there is nothing that happened in human history without ideas, be it development or destruction, construction or demolition. Ideologies differ and are in conflict with each other, depending on the interests, visions, beliefs, or desires they represent. Imperialism, aggression, fascism, racism, oppression, violence on one side, and liberty, equality, justice, democracy, prosperity, and harmony on the other, cannot exist without ideas that support them. An ideology, thus, is very important in explaining and understanding history, but more importantly in the making of history. Another aspect to all these is the fact that if a progressive ideology is followed rigidly and blindly, it can play a negative and destructive role. This is so because ideology serves a dual purpose. On one hand, it helps to explain and teach, and on the other, it can shield and blind. Thus, if a progressive ideology is followed blindly, its constructive and positive roles might end up being negative and destructive. As a result, ideology has to be always open to amendments, new ideas, and new experiences. It has to be enriched and renewed continuously. In short, it needs to be followed through an open, inquisitive, and critical mind. It should always be remembered that a closed, dogmatic, and conservative mind is very dangerous and destructive. We will discuss the importance of ideology in our history and that of other people in a later chapter. For the moment, let's move on to the meaning of, and necessity of politics. 20. 3. The meaning of politics. Even though the word politics is very common in our daily life, its meaning is usually confused and has a mixed understanding. One can often hear people say I am not interested in politics or I don't want to participate in politics. They are only saying these because they have a negative understanding of what politics is. They equate politics with the deception, conspiracy, and mischief that goes on with acquiring power. It is taken to be a dangerous and immoral profession that people have to stay away from it. Even in our own languages, the word politician connotes a person who is shrewd or dishonest. These are some of the wrong and negative meanings of politics. On the other hand, there are also those who shy away from politics by choosing to focus on other subjects or their own private interests. In any case, what is politics? Is it also possible to stay free of politics? As in the previous chapter, let's us refer to our own history to get answers to these questions. The Eritrean public has suffered a lot under colonial governments, with their colonial administrations, laws, and policies. These systems were designed to serve the interests of the colonialist. They were unjust and oppressive. And the Eritrean public was forced to challenge them. First it was in a disorganized way, but later on in an organized way that became more sophisticated and powerful with time. It chose not to live under oppression and humiliation, deprived of its dignity and human rights. As they say, where there is oppression, there is resistance, and the Eritrean people stood up for their rights and dignity. They resisted, and finally won, and were able to establish their own independent government. In short, what we learn from this example is that politics in these conditions of oppression and suffering, which Eritreans had to go through under colonial rule, meant the peaceful and military struggles that started in reaction to them, as well as the effort that is now being expended in nation building. 21. Italian, British, and Ethiopian colonialists had political systems and governments that served their interests. Eritrean nationalists, on the other hand, had to build a political system that helped them organize themselves, as well as their population, and to get the necessary force that helped them challenge and defeat the colonial and political system. Successive colonial regimes in Eritrea had political powers, governments, administrations, policies, and laws, designed to secure their interests, while suppressing Eritrean interests. Similarly, the national liberation struggle Eritreans waged against colonialism had the political power of unity, organization, army, program, strategy, and steadfastness that developed over a protracted struggle. This was the politics that secured victory, the right to national independence, and success of the nationalist goal. Politics, like ideology, has also different and conflicting forms. The first, a progressive and democratic political system, represents the interests of the public, and it is one that strives to bring justice, peace, liberty, and development. The second, a reactionary and dictatorial political system, is one that stands for narrow interests, aggression, colonialism, oppression, and exploitation. It should be noted that this classification is very general. It cannot be assumed that every political system will fall under one of these two broad categories. However, it will be helpful to take this classification as a general reference. The examples we saw above can give us a short answer to the question, what is politics? In general terms, politics is the organizations, mode of struggles and actions that nations or their social forces, capitalists, workers, peasants, professionals, undertake to secure their interests and objectives. In other words, politics stands for the policies that are proposed to dominate the political life, system of governance, and types of administrations in a state. Societies have a continuous clash or competition of interests and visions. This can, sometimes, take place between individuals or groups of people that have similar living standards and interests, cultures, and beliefs, or between organizations that have different visions and programs, or between associations that advocate different interests. Politics is thus a process whereby these differences and clashes are reconciled or resolved peacefully or legally. This might involve common understanding, dialogue, consensus, or the domination 22. Of one party. When this doesn't work, for one reason or another, violent struggle and war come as last resorts of politics. Politics then becomes a weapon of a struggle. A society can be divided into social classes and groups that have different living standards, professions, wealth, gender, culture, or power. There is always a clash of interest and conflict among these groups and classes. There is also a continuous, peaceful, or violent struggle. A struggle can also take place between the privileged and underprivileged, between landowners and peasants, between capitalists and workers, between those with power and the powerless. Nations also have conflicts because of difference in national interests, national aspirations, and national objectives. That is why there is a continuous competition and struggle between big and small, rich and poor, powerful and weak nations. Conflicts arise within a society or between nations because the available natural and man-made resources are limited and unable to satisfy the demands of greed. The main goal of political struggles, therefore, is the control of resources. It is important that a state has an authority which is in charge of a system on how resources are distributed, who takes what, how much, and when. This authority is what we call government. This means, a government is the highest political organization that has the power to control and distribute a country's resources. Since the government is the highest authority in control of the forces of coercion, army, police, and security, within its territory, it is called a sovereign power. By sovereign power, it is meant the highest power that doesn't allow any other authority within its territory. It is thus a must that governmental power or sovereign power becomes a political issue. The question of who controls power and how, is then a fundamental political question. As history tells us, for the most part, political power has been in the monopoly of a few monarchs, princes, and dictators, not that of the people. The idea that power belongs to the people, and everyone is equal before the law is a recent idea that developed in the past 2 to 3 centuries. This very idea was unacceptable to Western colonialists occupying a larger part of the world until 50 years ago. It is also of recent memory that the colonized people, 23 of the world, were forced to wage a long struggle for their right and liberty, rejecting the colonial rule of the few. As a result of this long struggle, everyone has now been forced to accept, at least on paper, if not in practice, the idea that sovereign power belongs to the people and that people are equal before the law. The Eritrean Revolution for Liberty and Equality is one such example. In conclusion, politics can simply be defined as the authority, organizational art, and activity that decides how resources are distributed, to whom they are distributed, what resources are distributed, when they are distributed, and how much is distributed. Before we move on to the next chapter, which is on the necessity of politics, let's use the definition of politics we gave above to discuss the question that we had raised earlier, which was, is it possible to stay out of politics? We have seen that every aspect of a person's life, in a society, is decided and influenced by politics. What this means is that as long as one is part of a society, he cannot remain free of politics. Even though someone can say it is his choice to stay out of politics, it only means he is choosing to be a passive observer in issues that determine his own life. That is, he is not staying out of politics in practice, but choosing to go along with what others choose to decide for him. For instance, while the majority of the Eritrean population was contributing, in one form or another, to the success of the national liberation struggle, there were a few who chose to do nothing. If it was up to these people, up to the few who chose to stay out of politics, Eritrea wouldn't be an independent nation. At this time, in post-independence Eritrea, the main politics is that of building a prosperous Eritrea. This politics is going to determine our future as well as the future of coming generations. To stay out of this politics is like choosing death over a healthy and active life. As we put it in the beginning, the idea of trying to stay out of politics, basically stems from having a wrong and negative understanding of what politics is. However, as we tried to explain above, politics is not a tool for malice, opportunism, or conspiracy only, and it doesn't only stand for narrow interests, playing destructive and negative roles. We also have to look at politics from its positive and constructive side. The history of our revolution has clearly taught us that politics can also serve the public's 24 interest. It can secure liberty, justice, and democracy. If its actors take a principled stand and are ready to sacrifice to bring about people's unity, resolve, and empowerment, politics can be a positive influence. 25. 4. The necessity of politics. When we talk about the necessity of politics, we are basically talking about the positive and constructive role of politics in a society. Based on this, we will discuss the benefits of politics in general, but particularly political power to the public and societies. Before discussing in detail the necessity of politics, let's give an example that will help us understand what the basic power of politics is. Since what people can achieve individually is limited, we can say political power is the essential tool and system people create as a group to achieve bigger results. Power is the ability to do, to force, to order, and to adopt. However, it does not only include these. Political power is also the ability to influence, to pressure, to convince, and that of cultivating compliance. In short, political power is critical to a society because it establishes a system that is helpful to conduct life and to grow. For this reason, it is impossible for any society to guarantee its security, survival, and progress without establishing its political power. As essential as it is, political power is also very sensitive. That is why it can be taken as a double-edged sword. It can bring progress, as well as destruction. It can build and destroy. Modern history has shown us, Numerous examples of political forces that struggled their way to governmental power and took positive steps to improve people's lives. Of progressive forces that stood for justice, equality, and democracy, those that fought against colonialism and imperialism to get their rights, and to be free. They won, established independent nations, they eliminated backwardness and poverty and thereby paved the road to progress. On the other hand, there were also fascists, racists, dictators, imperialists, and different conservative forces that controlled political power. They trampled upon the rights and interests of the public, they sowed seeds of war and destruction. They committed genocide, and established reigns of terror and barbarism, by doing away with justice and rationality. Thus, unless power is considered as a means to, not an end goal, dictatorial individuals who have no other goal than satisfying their own narrow interests could bring untold destruction once they get political power. 26. We have repeatedly witnessed this scenario. As a result, political power should have institutional checks and guarantees, based on the public's conscious participation and struggle. Taking the short illustration we gave about political power as an introduction, let's look at the necessity of politics as summarized under the following 8 points. 1. Politics as an art of cooperation. We had earlier observed that cooperation is the basis for human life and its growth. Man cannot live in isolation. To provide for the essential items of survival, to live in peace, and to continually improve his living conditions, he needs administrative systems and laws. For this, he needs to cooperate with others. It means cooperation is not a choice but an essential obligation. The question is, what kind of cooperation? At the same time, how can one build, preserve, and develop a strong cooperation? The cooperation among people we see in history has not been uniform. We see it change whenever conditions of life change. Originally, when man was living in small groups, dependent on hunting and gathering, his cooperation was based on understanding and supplementing. Disagreements and conflicts were resolved by way of communal pressure and reprimands. It was a primitive society without developed political power. After tens of thousands of years of gradual process, this primitive civilization gave birth to imperialism and monarchical rules. In this, we see complex cooperations administered by a governmental power. In the modern world that emerged in the past 2 to 3 centuries, we see the need of a sophisticated and intricate cooperation, not within individual societies, but also in an international level. In our modern world, politics serves as an art of cooperation, and it is used by every country to strengthen and protect its own national interest, and to build a strong government and to come out a winner in this competitive world. A society cannot establish a stable political system, achieve economic development, compete, and live in harmony and prosperity without cooperation. Politics, as an art of cooperation, is 27. Thus very essential in preventing the turmoil and chaos that comes from or as a result of division and confrontation, and in building a united and harmonious society and developing a democratic government based on the participation of the public. 2. Politics as an art of distribution of power. As we saw above, power can simultaneously be viewed and applied in 2 ways. First, power is fundamental because it is the major basis for an organized life and civilization. Second, and on the other hand, power can be abused and be misused very easily, and thus it is vulnerable and dangerous. The question of distribution of power is thus essential. This means politics has these 2 essential and vulnerable sides to it. The necessity of politics, as an art of distribution of power, is based on this premise. Power can be explained as having 2 levels. The first one is a power that is not bound by laws, one that doesn't have the consent of the people. People are forced to accept it. Therefore, it is as an ability of coercion or that of a sheer force. The second is a power that is bound by laws, one that has the consent and compliance of the people and a power that the public accepts as a legitimate one. This power is an authority. This difference between using power as sheer force and power as an authority is fundamental because it shows the difference between a legitimate and an illegitimate power, and that between a just power and an unjust power. Nevertheless, since power is always the ability of compulsion, we cannot take the two powers, force, and authority, as disconnected. The questions: who is served by power? How should power be organized and applied? In time, how does power change hands and legitimately transferred, are the core questions of politics. Politics, as an art of power, helps us answer these questions, in deciding the basis, structure, process, and transfer of power. Politics as an art of distribution of power is essential in establishing a power that is bound by law and one that has institutional guarantee, a power that is based on the public's participation and serves the interest of the people. It prevents the destruction that comes when governmental. 28. Power is in the monopoly of few and being used to provide service for their interest. 3. Politics as process of building and developing common interest. A society is built on special and common interests. On the one hand, it has the special interests of different groups, on the other hand and beyond these special interests, there are common interests that enable a society to survive together. A society, therefore, should have the ability to harmonize and narrow the differences of interests between urban and rural, between employer and employee, and between the advantaged and the disadvantaged, and it should try to reconcile the conflicts. What this means is that there has to be common interests that represent the majority. It has been observed, in the experiences of some countries, where countries that were not able to develop common interests and where individual interests took center stage, easily descend into chaos and disintegration. In order to be stable and strong, a country first and foremost, has to develop and satisfy common interests. Hence, politics is a process, which forges a common interest from the different interests. This is why it is vital. For politics as a source of common understanding and consent. Having a common understanding is the foundation of a society. A society cannot survive without the common interests, principles, values, and institutions it has for its foundation. Common understanding is the common belief and adherence to these fundamental principles, values, interests, and institutions. Common understanding does not develop in a vacuum. It needs a continuous effort and nurturing, and politics is a tool that helps a society to develop a common understanding on fundamental issues. In other words, common understanding needs to be accompanied by public consent, and public consent means the public's trust in and compliance to the government. A country that has a common understanding and the public's consent can be stable and strong, and can achieve many noble goals. Therefore, politics as a source of common interest and consent is 29. Very essential in building a strong political system. 5. Politics as process of the public participation in power. Public participation in political process and power is a recent phenomenon of history. As we mentioned earlier, for the longest part of history, the masses were treated as servants and outcasts, not as citizens and actors in politics. Power was in the hands of the few to serve their interests. The concept and practice of public participation in power, political equality, and citizenship only came as a result of a long and difficult struggle of victorious modern revolutions. However, even today, even though the public participation is acceptable on paper, we should never forget that when it comes to practice, it leaves a lot to be desired. To ensure that public participation does not remain superficial, people have to be organized. They have to build institutions that encourage public participation. There ought to be different opportunities, civic associations, local administrative institutions, assemblies, and avenues where the public can express its opinions and provide criticisms. In other words, there ought to be a guaranteed and continuous political process that ensures public participation. Public participation is a foundation of a solid political system. A government becomes stable and strong when the population has a participatory role rather than being relegated to be a spectator. Public participation enables a government to have a conducive environment for development, by securing peace and justice internally, and creating the ability to challenge and beat external enemies. Politics, as a process that ensures public participation in power, is very essential in establishing a strong and a democratic government. 6. Politics as a tool of change and progress. Society is in constant change and growth. A stagnant society is one that either has fragmented or has died. As long as it exists, a society is always in motion. If it is not moving in the forward direction, then it will be going backwards, if not towards better conditions then towards worse. 30. 1. Change and development are thus part and parcel of a society. A society's life is dependent on production and reproduction. What this means is that a society works to produce what it needs for survival and reproduces and cultivates generations that succeed it. These two processes of production and reproduction are the fundamental processes of change and development. The main challenge of a society is the administration of changes and developments. Every change is not necessarily useful and beneficial, that is why it is important to secure an effective administration of change and development. This is done by guarding against harmful and negative changes, while grooming and emphasizing the positive and constructive changes, and exploiting them to bring about development. Therefore, politics is a tool we use for this administration of change. A society is also full of continuous competition and conflict between generations, between old and new ideas and technologies, between progressive and reactionary visions, between radical and conservative customs, and between those for change and those who oppose change. Politics has a vital role in channeling this competition and conflict into a measured and productive development that serves the interest of society. 7. Politics as a tool of conducting international relations. The current international system is composed of rich and poor, as well as powerful and weak countries. This system is structured, and dictated by the will and interests of the rich and powerful countries. It is guided, mainly by interests not principles, and by force not justice. Securing one's national interest, in the current international system, is thus a huge challenge. Politics, together with diplomacy, serves to secure national interests in this world, ruled by force rather than reason. It serves as a guide on how to establish relations and cooperation with other countries, based on your own interests, ensuring peaceful coexistence, as a means of steering the balance of power, and a guide on how to conduct regional, as well as global international relations. 31. 8. Politics as an instrument of struggle. The modern world is preoccupied by local and global struggles for securing rights and interests. These struggles could be between different social forces within a country or between nations as a whole. These disagreements and frictions are due to incompatible aspirations and interests. Social struggle is thus one of the main expressions of a society's conditions, and this makes the role of politics vital. Politics as an instrument of struggle and as an organizational and educational tool has a fundamental role in clarifying objectives, organizing people, and in exposing and undermining the enemy. 32. 5. The relationship between ideology and politics. We find that ideology and politics have a relation of commonalities as well as differences. To understand ideology and politics better, it is wise to examine their relationship. In the section that follows, we will examine the relationship between ideology and politics in 3 stages. 1. Vision and program. Vision describes an identity of a person. No human activity can be accomplished without a vision. At the rudimentary level, we see that daily lives and activities of human beings cannot be accomplished without a vision of what one wants to accomplish. To carry out some tasks, say building a house, one first has to have a vision. The vision can be what is in the mind of those who will carry out the task, or one of a clear and professional design drawn on paper. The task is to build the house using this vision/drawing as a guide. The resulting physical building then becomes a reality of the house, which was originally envisioned on paper or on a mind. The reason why human activities are different from that of animals is because, instead of doing things out of a natural instinct, is that human beings first think and have a vision of what they want to do. Human activity is thus an activity that can accomplish a task that was not in existence before. Nothing that was not in existence can come about without thinking, foresight, and enabling vision. Based on this understanding, we can say that history is the process of how man developed a vision that helped him answer questions of life. No history is made without vision. Every major achievement of history had a major vision behind it. Since vision is a precondition for victory, there is no society, government, or political force in history that has achieved victory without developing a clear vision that guided it to secure its objectives, and undertake its operations. 33. However, vision by itself is not sufficient or good enough to make history. Vision is the general goal to be aimed at. There has to be also a step-by-step plan that puts this vision into action. This step-by-step plan, which leads to the goal of a vision, is what is called a program. Unless a vision is accompanied, and detailed by a valid program, it only remains as a wish. A program therefore outlines and assesses the implementation and practicality of all political, economic, cultural, and social ideas by raising questions like, what, how, where, and when. It is, thus, important to have a vision and a program that gradually achieve the desired outcomes foreseen by a vision. While vision can be explained in terms of ideology, objectives, principles, and values, a program is explained in terms of politics, policies, strategies, and plans. A vision is converted into a reality through a program, and a program is guided and focused by a vision. This relationship between vision and program is one example of the relationship that exists between ideology and politics. Two values and policies, lofty goals or ideas such as justice, equality, liberty, prosperity, creativity, and harmony are what people cherish and yearn for. These noble goals are called values. However, everybody cannot achieve the values he/she yearns for immediately and uniformly. As a result, a society should have a method to decide on what, how, and when these values can be attained. This means of deciding is what is called a policy. A policy, therefore, is a political process that decides on what, how, and when values are attained. It is helpful to look into the relationship between values and policies using examples. For instance, if we take the policy of equal development and gender equality, they are expressions of the values of social justice and equality. We can thus see that the values of social justice and equality can only be implemented through policies that serve them. What this means is that policy is the process of planning, executing, and assessing how values can be implemented. We can also explain the relationship between the two as follows: values are the basis for policies, and policies are the instruments of values. This 34 is another example of the relationship between ideology and politics. 3. Theory and organization. A simple definition of theory is that it is a model of ideas used to explain general tendencies and directions, and it is an accumulation and refinement of different observations, experiments, and experiences. Theory enables us to identify the main elements of certain situations, and it helps us explain scenarios or possibilities as well as in predicting future directions. Practice without theory is incomplete. A practice devoid of theory is also blind, limited, and confused. It cannot be successful. As a result, theory is critical in every sphere of human knowledge and practice. Theory is also important in political life. For example, economic, social, and cultural challenges cannot find best solutions without theoretical evidences that are based on research. This makes theory a vital instrument of politics. Theory also has to be the foundation of political organization. Theory enables a political organization to be based on the right visions and appraisals. On the other hand, political organization enables the implementation of theory. This relationship between theory and organization is an additional example of the relationship that exists between ideology and politics. In general, the three relationships of ideology and politics given above show the deep interdependence between the two. One is not complete without the other. This means ideology gets life through politics. Politics also helps ideology become practical by giving it a realistic role in the life of a society and its development. Politics ensures the realization of ideology. On the other hand, politics, using the guiding forces of ideology and vision, directed by their goals, ideas, and beliefs, serves to build a good society by producing values that the public desires. Summary. In the previous 5 chapters, we discussed the meanings of and need for ideology and politics, as well as the relationships between the two. We also tried to explain the necessity of the two and their roles in society by looking at their identifying meanings. 35. The preceding chapters will serve as a background for the chapters that are to follow. We cannot discuss about the importance and roles of ideology and politics in nation building in general, and that of Eritrea in particular, without having or gaining basic background knowledge on both ideology and politics. However, what is important to us, as Eritreans, is not the discussion and knowledge of ideology and politics, but the knowledge on how these two help us in practical terms in our endeavor of nation building in Eritrea. Using the previous chapters as the basis of reference, we will discuss the importance and role of ideology and politics in nation building in general, and in the success of the Eritrean Revolution and the building a strong Eritrean nation in particular. 36. 6. The importance and role of ideology and politics in nation building. History tells us that ideology and politics had significant and fundamental roles in the building of nations. Nation building, as all other big historical accomplishments, cannot succeed without ideas, visions, and beliefs. Nation building succeeded in many parts of the world, because it was led by national and political struggles, which were organized and guided by nationalist ideologies. We present the following examples because they will be helpful in our discussion. In Europe, where modern nations emerged for the first time, the struggle to build such centralized national governments from fragmented feudal territories was led by political movements that stood for nationalist ideologies. Even though nation building had different characteristics in different European countries, in every one of them the nationalist ideologies and the political movements that represented them were the determining factors. If we take the nation building of modern Britain, for example, it was a gradual process that took many years to flourish. In France, on the other hand, there was a revolution and a radical change that came about in a few years. However, in both countries, there were movements with a national ideology that spearheaded the nation-building process. Of course, those in Britain had a reformist ideology and those in France had a revolutionary ideology. Similarly, we find ideology and politics playing a vital role in the founding of the United States of America. In the United States, an independent government was established right after the victory of the American Revolution over British colonial rule. This revolution succeeded because it was led by an ideology of liberty and equality. Of course, America's liberty and equality, until recently, was exclusively meant for rich white men. Under this ideology, slavery was allowed and was justified, and women were excluded. But the fact that the U.S. Constitution, as the main document of this American ideology, had played a huge role in building and strengthening the USA to be the sole superpower of the world is an evidence of how critical the roles of ideology and politics were. In 37. This modern day and age, we are witnessing how the power of American ideology is being felt around the world, as America tries to dominate the world through and by the use of its mass media and entertainment industry. The building of modern Japan is also another important experience. Until the middle of the 19th century, Japanese society was still a feudal society. However, in the middle of the 19th century, Japan got a leadership that understood that they couldn't compete with Western nations until they progressed in science and technology. That leadership managed to transform Japan into an industrial nation in a matter of 30 to 40 years. In that process, the Japanese imperial ideology that was based on ancient Japanese culture had a vital role to play. The history of modern China, a nation with a long history of civilization, is different from that of Japan. In the 19th century, China was disintegrating and spiraling downwards. In fact, it was a semi-colony of the Western powers. The Chinese Revolution won in 1949 because its leader was the Communist Party of China (CPC). The CPC, established in 1921, waged 28 years of armed struggle and it came out victorious. In this experience, we see revolutionary ideology and politics playing a leading role in the victory of the Chinese Revolution, as well as in the development of China under the leadership of the Communist Party after the revolution. Before we conclude this chapter, it is also important to look at the experience of our own continent, Africa. Many African researchers and activists agree that the fundamental problem of why Africa is not showing progress is that it has not developed the right kind of ideology and politics. In most African countries, the nationalist movements that sprang up during the days of anti-colonial struggles were not able to organize and mobilize their population for the project of nation building. That is why many African nations were unable to build strong nations, where their population could have justice and prosperity. Even now, if African nations are going to free themselves from dependency, poverty, and the depressing situations they are under, they have to develop political movements that have ideological and political organizations that can mobilize and guide the population into nation building and development. 38. In the examples we cited, we have seen how different ideologies and political movements, reformist, revolutionary, imperial, communist, and liberal ideologies and political organizations led successful nation-building projects. This was possible because each country has a unique history and situation. These experiences show us that to have a successful nation-building project in Eritrea, we have to have an ideological capacity and political organization, which is based on our own history and unique experience. Next, we will discuss the importance and role of ideology and politics in the success of the Eritrean liberation struggle and in the building of a strong Eritrean nation. 39. 7. The importance and role of ideology and politics during the Eritrean Revolution for liberation. The correct characterization of the Eritrean Revolution is that it was an experience that demonstrated the power of a just cause, a revolutionary idea, and a selfless, conscious, and organized fighting force. In short, the Eritrean Revolution proved the power of ideas and organization. It was a successful experience that showed how potent and critical this abstract power could be. That is why we say the Eritrean Revolution would not have been able to continue and succeed without its revolutionary ideology and politics. The Eritrean Revolution needed a superior form of organization, commitment, creativity, and initiative in order to challenge the internal and external balance of power that was allied against it. It exploited the challenges it faced and turned them into strength, and it came out victorious at the end. In other words, it had to develop ideology and politics that enabled it to change its weakness into strength and its small size into a large power. That was the result of the revolutionary ideology and politics that was refined through a long internal struggle. The advanced ideological capacity and political force that was needed to crown the Eritrean Revolution with victory was one that was developed through a long and challenging process of struggle and experience. The revolutionary ideology and politics that led to victory grew in an internal struggle. The sweeping crisis that emerged in the early stages of the armed struggle, as a result of the wrong stand and leadership of the ELF, was a major challenge. The revolutionary ideology and politics of the Eritrean Revolution developed in the struggle that was waged to solve this crisis. That ideology grew to have a sharper focus, first out of the struggle within the Eritrean Liberation Front, second within the Eritrean People's Liberation Forces, and finally out of the process of struggle and changes inside, both the Eritrean People's Liberation Front, EPLF, and the ELF. By the end of the 1970s and in later years, this ideology and 40. Politics became the foundation of the clear vision and strong organization that led committed and conscious fighters and people to victory. The process passed through a crisis, civil war, gains, and setbacks, but it finally attained a sweeping victory. The ideology that developed within the EPLF was not just an outcome of the internal struggle and experience. The EPLF had also adopted revolutionary ideas from the experience of other national liberation movements and colonized peoples from around the world, and used them as points of reference. In short, we can say the revolutionary ideology of the EPLF was the product of the amalgamation of Eritrean and international experiences. This revolutionary ideology was used to make an Eritrean history. The internal development of the Eritrean Revolution was shaped by the ideological and political struggle between the revolutionary and reactionary lines. By taking advantage of the positive and constructive aspects of the Eritrean culture, the revolutionary line was able to secure unity, harmony, power, and finally victory. On the contrary, the reactionary line tried to divide, antagonize, weaken, and fragment the Eritrean forces by exploiting the negative and destructive aspects of the Eritrean culture. At the end, the latter was defeated by the former. The struggle between these two opposing ideological and political camps went on internally within the ELF, within the EPLF, and between the ELF and the EPLF. When the EPLF became the decisive force of the camp that represented the revolutionary ideology, the Eritrean armed struggle was able to achieve a trajectory of victory. The EPLF was tested during the biggest and critical challenge that faced the Eritrean Revolution starting in 1978, and it came out stronger as a political and military power. When the balance of power tipped towards the Ethiopian colonial forces, due to the massive intervention of the Soviet Union, the EPLF faced a setback. If the Eritrean Revolution did not have a vanguard organization that rendered these setbacks and relative weakness temporary, the Eritrean Revolution could have faced a total defeat. At the time, there were only two options: to continue the armed struggle until victory or to surrender completely. The internal and external pressures pushing for a complete surrender were not something 41. One can dismiss as insignificant. Eventually, the armed struggle was able to survive and to continue successfully because the plan of the strategic withdrawal. Repeated enemy offensives were beaten back and the balance of power gradually shifted in favor of the Eritrean Revolution. The enemy was eventually defeated, because the Eritrean Revolution was led by the EPLF, an organization committed to revolutionary ideology and politics. One can thus say that revolutionary ideology and politics were the means that made the Eritrean Revolution achieve victory. That was possible because the EPLF managed to build a stronger political organization that had a higher form of unity of purpose and practice, courage and steadfastness, and a strong and committed people's army that was a reflection of the organization. That ideology helped mobilize the population, which was neglected by colonial politics, and was made to take an active role in its future and achieve victory. The revolutionary ideology and politics of the EPLF was anchored by three pillars: nationalism, social justices, and a conscious, committed and active citizen nationalism, the unity and equality of Eritreans, above all nurturing trusted and committed citizens, eliminating subnational politics, ensuring unity based on diversity, building a national political system and institutions based on the will and participation of every Eritrean, cultivating a national common understanding, and securing national interests. Social justice, building a nation based on justice and equality by combining nationalism with social justice, narrowing the gap between urban and rural, center and periphery, the rich and the poor, securing equal opportunities, ensuring equal development, guaranteeing equality and partnership between men and women, ensuring a sustainable economic development that improves the lives of people and protects the environment, implementing democracy as a basic principle that shapes the political, social and economic life, and establishing a constitutional political system that is based on the rule of law, consent, and active public participation. 42. Conscious, committed and active citizen, building an honest and trusted citizen that puts the interests of the nation and public ahead of his own, one who accepts the ideology of social justice and works towards its realization, one who is balanced, humble and confident, one who has developed a scientific and critical thinking, one with broad and tolerant outlook, one who doesn't tolerate injustice and oppression, one who fights against these actively and one who is conscious and committed. Citizen. Again, the history of the Eritrean Revolution is a history that demonstrated the power of ideas and organization. This experience has also proved that a revolutionary ideology and politics can make history, if it is adopted by a population. 43. 8. The importance and role of ideology and politics in building modern Eritrea. In the previous chapters, we observed the importance and role of ideology and politics, and the power of ideas and organization in the building of a stronger Eritrea, where justice and progress prevail. What this means is that without developing an ideological capacity, and a political force that represents the interests and will of the Eritrean people, it will be impossible to build a stronger and stable Eritrea. By ideological and political capacity, it is meant an organized political force. In this process, the Eritrean People's Front for Democracy and Justice (PFDJ), as an organization that led a successful revolution, as an organization that has a widespread public base and support, and as a democratic force committed to the national interest and social justice, has a central place in the future of Eritrean history and politics. Let us look at the importance and role of ideology and importance and role of politics in building modern Eritrea in that order. Importance and role of ideology. We have seen in the last chapter that the Eritrean Revolution would not have succeeded without the direction of a responsible national ideology of social justice. Moreover, even today, the ideology of social justice that takes nationalism, social justice, and conscious, committed and active citizens as its three central pillars is our main tool in the building of a stable Eritrea. The PFDJ has underlined this importance with the following words in its charter. We were victorious, in spite of all the difficulties and dangers, because as a liberation movement and a people, we had clarity and a common vision of the goals of independence and peace. Today too, we must have a vision of future Eritrea and its people, and it is of utmost importance that such a vision enters into the hearts and minds of all Eritreans so that they can organize and strive for its realization. 44. We can discuss the importance of the ideology of social justice and its role in the building of a stronger Eritrea in the following 4 points. 1. Building an awareness of history. We have seen earlier that ideology builds an awareness of history by taking a collective understanding of the past, the present, and the future. The ideology of social justice would serve us well to build a solid and united society that knows what it has to do, and one with a strong determination and courage to reach its goal. The ideology of social justice has an important and critical role. By building an awareness of history, it can help us cultivate active and capable youth that know where it came from, youth that takes pride in its own identity, youth that understands where it is, youth willing to face today's challenges with courage, youth that understands where it is heading, and youth determined to make history. Due to these facts, there needs to be a continuous effort to make sure this ideology permeates the youth, and is used in nation building. 2. Developing and strengthening social harmony. The national unity and awareness that developed through the common experience of the revolution has managed to strengthen and develop the already existing social harmony. However, continuous effort must be expended to make sure that this social harmony is not eroded. To this end, there will be a need to wage an ideological fight against division, confrontation, fear, hate, and subnational tendencies and practices. The practices and ideas of partnership, unity, equality, participation, and partnership should be continuously cultivated through ideological education. In this regard, the ideology of social justice will play a big role in developing and strengthening the already existing social harmony among the Eritrean people. 3. Enhancing common understanding. The Eritrean people have a common understanding regarding the basic national issues of identity and unity. This common understanding was fostered in the long national struggle for independence. It was instrumental in giving Eritreans their cohesion and power. We need to defend it and 45. Develop it further. It will thus be very important to fight those that sow divisive ideas against our common understanding. In addition, we will need a continuous ideological education and campaigning to strengthen and cultivate the already existing national awareness and common understanding. Parallel to this, since common understanding needs to be expressed institutionally, we need to strengthen our ongoing broad efforts of building national institutions that are based on the interests and participations of the different sectors of the Eritrean society. For strengthening cultural identity, psychological power, and confidence, it is clear that one of the factors that enabled us to fight courageously against Ethiopian colonialism and its supporters was our psychological makeup and identity, which was the hallmark of our strength. At this time, in our efforts to build a developed and strong nation, we need to organize, mobilize, and utilize the cultural and psychological resources of our society, following a clear ideological line. Our courage, determination, hope, long-suffering, focus, discipline, and ambition are our unquantifiable quality resources. They are no less important than our material resources and will be a strong driving force and critical in building a stronger Eritrea. By strengthening our cultural and informational institutions, we need to make an ideological effort to enhance our cultural and psychological resources. In short, we have to understand from what we saw above that we couldn't build a stronger Eritrea without the ideology of social justice. We have witnessed the negative and dangerous consequences that came about because our ideological struggle slacked after independence. That was also why the PFDJ reasserted the fundamental importance and role of ideology and vision in the National Charter that was adopted in its Third Congress. In what followed and from the results we have achieved so far in different sectors, even though they are not up to the scale of our expectations, we have proved the benefits of the ideology and vision of social justice. The experience of our revolutionary struggle and that of post-independence demonstrate the critical importance and role of ideology, and if we stay committed and implement the ideology of social justice, we have no doubt we will again make history in building a 46. Stronger and prosperous Eritrea. The importance and role of politics. We have seen in our earlier discussion how critical the importance of politics is in the art of organization and power, in the art of distribution of resource, the resolution and reconciliation of conflicts, and in the building of the Eritrean nation. As we saw above, politics is the practical implementation of ideology. In our national liberation struggle, revolutionary politics laid the foundation for victory, and today, it is clear that a national democratic politics will play a critical role in building modern Eritrea. It is, thus, important to discuss the importance and role of politics in the building of a just, democratic, and prosperous Eritrea, based on the 8 aspects we discussed earlier. 1. Politics as an art of cooperation. A nation is a form of cooperation of a people inside a territorial boundary with one political and economic system and under a centralized government. There is no question that in this modern world a population that doesn't have a higher degree of cooperation, organized by a national government, cannot secure its interests and desires. It is critical that we develop the national political system that we have been cultivating since the days of the armed struggle for independence, the system that helped us secure unity and cooperation. The degree of cooperation we already have should be taken into an even higher and firmer ground. To do this, we need to fight continuously against sectarian and divisive tendencies that are designed to weaken the existing cooperation among our population. In order to widen and broaden the circle of cooperation, we need to cultivate the political culture of trust and collaboration, and strengthen governmental and social institutions that encourage it. For this reason, politics as an art of cooperation has a bigger role in developing and strengthening the Eritrean culture of cooperation, unity. 47. And trust, and in fighting off the elements or mentality of division, confrontation, fear, and mistrust. 2. Politics as an art of power. Cooperation cannot survive without power. As we discussed in previous chapters, power is critical for both growth and destruction. It is equally important and sensitive. Nevertheless, a society without an established political power will not only fail to secure its interests and desires, it can also be exposed to chaos, destruction, and anarchy. The sad situation prevailing in Somalia is a recent example of this. Societies can be measured by the degree of power they have accumulated. The difference between those societies that have a lot of power and those that have little power is directly proportional to the difference in wealth between these countries. There is no country that has developed without first establishing a power base that secures its interests and aspirations. It is also important to note that it is necessary to build a stronger power base in order to build a stable country. In order to build a developed and stable Eritrea, we need to accomplish the following two tasks related to power. First, we need to build a stable national power that is capable of building and defending the country. Second, we need to build a constitutional system that ensures the proper distribution, execution, and transfer of power. In order to accomplish these two critical tasks, politics is fundamentally needed as an art of power. 3. Politics as a process of building and enhancing common interests. It is hard to build and enhance a common interest from the differing and conflicting interests of a society. However, a country that cannot develop and highlight its common interest will always remain paralyzed and torn apart by narrow interests that are often in conflict and in competition with each other. Politics is thus a tool that helps a country highlight its common interests and work to realize it. 48. Eritrea has waged a long and difficult struggle and paid a heavy price to build and highlight its common interest. In the 1960s, for example, on top of other issues, our common interest was not well developed and highlighted, and the end result was the division and confrontation that followed. In the ensuing struggle, however, because a common interest was developed and emphasized, it laid a foundation that enabled the movement to replace weakness with strength, and division with unity. The EPLF was able to build and highlight our common interest through its political, cultural, and social programs that were a reflection of the interest of the Eritrean people. However, after one secures the interest of national independence through the expulsion of colonial rule, it is common for differences of interests and points of view to surface as a full force. Therefore, developing, as much as possible, an inclusive common interest that reflects the interests of the majority of the population is one that requires a continuous struggle. We have to be able to build a political process that is capable of distilling common interests out of the differing and conflicting special interests of peasants, pastoralists, capitalists, professionals, workers, and merchants. It is necessary to implement fair policies that resolve the differences of interests between the urban and rural, center and periphery, those with opportunities and those without opportunities. Women, though they account for half of the population, have faced different degrees of neglect and oppression. They need to be free of discrimination and oppression. Their rights need to be secured, they have to be allowed to be active and equal participants. Common interest has to be where everyone benefits and gets his/her fair share. Therefore, it is important to ensure equal development by implementing programs guided by policies of social justice. Politics, as a process of building and enhancing common interest, thus has an important role. It helps us build a solid ground upon which we can develop and enhance the national interest, as well as building an Eritrea that every citizen can call his or her own. For politics as a source of common understanding and consent, we have already seen that common understanding is the basis for common. 49. Life, and politics gives a society stability, peace, and strength by creating and enhancing understanding and cooperation. It helps society to face and solve problems together, and in creating harmony and unity. For this reason, common understanding is very important. In order for a country to have a common understanding, there has to be a government that represents the interests and aspiration of the population, and that has to be based on public participation. This is so because common understanding is an expression of common interest and practice. What this means is that if there is a common understanding, there is a government that has the consent and compliance of the population. In short, it means there is public consent. Common understanding and public consent are thus inseparable. In Eritrea, a common understanding has developed, over a long process of struggle, and is anchored on the values and principles of nationalism, equality, secularism, regarding religious issues as private and national issues as common, tolerance, and equal development. However, we have to understand that there are internal as well as external forces that have interests of their own and are trying to erode and oppose this common understanding. We have to defend our gains against their attack. Beyond this, we also need to enhance the common understanding we have through a continuous political struggle. In Eritrea, politics as a source of common understanding and public consent has an enormous importance in building a democratic government based on common interest, consent, and public participation. 5. Politics as process of the public's participation in power sharing. In the process of our revolution, those who were forgotten, neglected, and passive members of society, the peasants, pastoralists, women, workers, students, and intellectuals were transformed to be active actors. Because of this, the conscious and organized public participation was well grounded. This public participation was the outcome of a long and difficult political struggle. This process is also continuing in the post-independence stage as well. There cannot be public participation without organization. To ensure 50. A meaningful and genuine public participation from the local to the national level, we need to develop public organization and awareness. In this process, the PFDJ and civic associations have a big role to play. Politics as a process of public participation in power sharing is very important, for it aids to have the necessary organization and awareness that will enable a society to have a meaningful participation in power. 6. Politics as a tool of change and progress. Politics is an important instrument that brings change to a society in a positive and constructive manner. If change comes in an uncontrolled way, there is a big possibility that it can have unintended and sometimes destructive consequences. Politics is thus a tool that enables change to take a positive path into progress and development. The generation that secured victory and its successor generation should develop a relationship of understanding, tolerance, and one based on the sharing of experiences. This is very important in order to sustain victory and nation building. One of the main challenges of the post-revolution eras is thus cultivating a new generation that takes over the reign of leadership of the revolution, its values and principles, and continues to develop it. Thus, we need to double the effort that has been ongoing to cultivate a generation that is going to continue a successful nation-building process. To increase and strengthen the political awareness and maturity of the younger generation, there will be a need to plan and implement political education programs. In addition, there will be a need to organize events, where the youth would ensure its participation in local and national issues in an organized fashion. There will also be a need to plan and implement programs that will narrow the gap between the older and younger generations, as well as to cultivate a relationship of trust and respect, and one that opens a venue for the youth to learn the best values and experiences of the older generation. Politics as a tool for change and progress has then a bigger role to play in the cultivation of a competent Eritrean youth that will inherit the revolutionary legacy. 7. Politics for conducting international relations. In this world dominated by the powerful and their interests, a critical aspect of international relations is securing one's interest and political power. Similarly, of critical interest to us is that of ensuring our national survival and securing our interests. To this end, the primary goal is our internal strength. Secondary to this is the regional and global relations that must be based on our internal strength. Therefore, politics is an important tool to develop institutional capacity that will help us conduct foreign policies and relations that are based on cooperation, peaceful coexistence, and relations that will contribute to our economic and cultural progress, relations that will ensure peace and stability, and those that take national interests and common interests into consideration. Therefore, politics as a tool for conducting international relations has a big contribution in building a stable Eritrea that secures and defends its national interests. 8. Politics as an instrument of struggle. Saying that politics as an instrument of struggle has to play its role in the process of nation building means the PFDJ has to first successfully accomplish its political mission. The PFDJ needs to conduct a continuous and effective work of strengthening the national political force, continuously exposing and challenging the subnational politics of distrust and confrontation, building and enhancing the positive and constructive national politics of trust, unity and caring. If political struggle lacks vigor and continuity, it is understood that there is a possibility that old and defeated ideas and practices could gradually creep in back to life and could unfold dangerous consequences. Therefore, as in the time of the armed struggle, the PFDJ needs to continue the political task of educating and organizing the people, that of challenging and exposing wrong and dangerous ideas and practices, as well as increasing public participation. Politics is thus necessary as an instrument of struggle, because it serves in strengthening the foundation of nation building, by increasing the consciousness, unity, and courage of a population. 52. 9. The necessity and objective of political education in independent Eritrea. During the armed struggle, political education was part of an important daily activity. The leadership and members of the EPLF believed in the need, effectiveness, and the fundamental value of political education, and they decided to implement it. Political education had a huge role in building the EPLF, one of the strongest liberation movements of Africa in the 20th century, into a committed and strong vanguard organization that had the trust, support, and participation of the public as its basis, an organization that had the unity of ideas and practice. In short, political education serving as a continuous source of consciousness, commitment, and courage of the population and fighters, was one of the key weapons that helped the EPLF secure its final victory. Unfortunately, after independence, political education, but particularly formal political education, didn't progress as it should have been. Even though there were a limited number of formal political discussions, educational seminars, and meetings, we cannot say it was satisfactory, or up to the level of what should have been. The negative consequences that followed, because of the lack of formal political education, have now highlighted its critical need. What we are doing now is to make up for the mistakes that were made. We are now embarking on giving a regular political education, even though we are starting it a little bit late. Definition of political education: we can say that there are two types of political education, a formal, and an informal one. First, an informal political education is a stock of political ideas and principles that we accumulate from the society and the political system we live in, from our family members and surroundings, from the mass media, schools, and in general, from our experiences of political participation. 53. Second, formal political education is a political education accumulated through formal education, meetings, and seminars, or through the help of books and magazines. In this general understanding, we can take the national struggle of the Eritrean people that started in the 1940s as a process of a general political education. Without forgetting that there was an accumulation of political experience during the Italian colonial era as well, we can say that national political education in Eritrea started with the starting of the struggle for independence in the 1940s. In the beginning, in the 1940s, with the start of modern political activities in Eritrea, there was political education that was being disseminated primarily through participation in the political struggle, but also through the newspapers, meetings, and debates as well. We can also take the activities the political parties of the day were taking to win supporters and influence public opinion as a form of political education. This process moved forward in the 1950s with the starting of the workers' and student movements, as well as with the formation of the Eritrean Liberation Movement, ELM. With the start of the national armed struggle, political education moved into a new phase. It attained its highest form in the political education program of the EPLF. During the armed struggle, formal political education started for the first time in the early 1970s. In those years, the Eritrean People's Liberation Forces initiated a literacy campaign as well as a program of regular political education for its fighters. Starting in the mid-1970s, a continuous regular political education was given to fighters, from the moment they started their military training. That political education was supported by textbooks written for that purpose. There were also internal as well as general magazines and seminar booklets. With the establishment of the Dimtsi Hafish, voice of the broad masses, there were political programs that were being broadcasted widely. A Qadr school was also established, and by 1990, in 26 rounds, it had trained thousands of Qadrs. There was also continuous political education given to the population in the liberated areas, to those under enemy occupation, as well as those in the diaspora. Each tailored and organized according to the specific condition and organization and through the help of the mass organizations of the EPLF. 54. Even within the ELF, even though its effectiveness and continuity was limited due to the internal weakness of the front, political education was being conducted, and political cadres were being trained starting from the First Organizational Congress of 1971. In the Eritrean Revolution in general, but particularly within the EPLF, political education had made a huge contribution in developing national consciousness, solidifying unity, and in strengthening commitment, courage and belief. The experience of the EPLF has demonstrated that political education is a potent weapon of struggle. It had contributed in building a strong people's army, organized masses, and conscious and committed fighters. For the first time in Eritrean history, the neglected and oppressed masses were mobilized and organized through the process of political education. As a result, they were able to participate and determine their own future. Political education also laid the ground for a society that has political maturity, national consciousness, a society that was able to form a common understanding on fundamental national issues, and a society that is able to improve its life, solve its problems, and build its country in unity and harmony. We have, thus, seen that political education is not only a formal political education, but also one that grows and improves in the process of participating in political struggle and activities. In this broad definition, political education is a process of political awareness and maturity, where a society and its members are nurtured. A society that is devoid of political maturity cannot safeguard its interests, satisfy its needs, build its country, improve its livelihood, solve its problems, or lead its life in harmony and stability. Political maturity is what a society develops over a long process of a political struggle to have common understanding and institutions on the fundamental issues that determine its life. It is also the political competence and political tools that a society owns to properly administer and solve its internal problems and differences. In general, political maturity is the political culture and political capacity a society owns. In our case, our experience has taught us that political education is an important and effective tool in building political consciousness and maturity. 55. The necessity of political education. We have briefly discussed the role of political education in the history of our national struggle in general, and the experience of the EPLF in particular. The question that comes next then is, why do we need political education in an independent Eritrea? As we have seen earlier, political education in a country or society is all the theoretical and practical education that builds political consciousness, maturity, common understanding, political capacity, distribution, and separation of power. This process is not terminal, but continues as long as societies exist, and political systems and governments are needed. Particularly, we Eritreans, as people who have an independent country that was established after a long struggle for liberation, and as people who are now trying to build a political system that satisfies the interest of our people, cannot afford to neglect political education, and our experience, challenges, and goals would not allow it. Political education is an effective and powerful weapon that will help us build a nation. It is necessary that we build our modern nation upon the foundation of political consciousness and participation, on the fundamental revolutionary principles and values of nationalism, social justice, commitment, self-reliance, and courage built on political culture that was developed during our revolutionary struggle for independence. We cannot have a better and proven foundation than this. Because of this, political education will have a big role and essentiality in order to preserve this foundation, and to develop it in ways that fit the demands of an independent Eritrea and embark upon new developments. Just as the EPLF led us to independence, the PFDJ is our vanguard organization that will lead us to the victory of building a modern nation. An organization is a vehicle that leads into an objective, but it cannot achieve its goals unless it has capable, effective, organized, and committed members. In other words, a strong organization is the sum total of its organized, conscious, committed, disciplined and strong members. As we have witnessed it in our experience, our political consciousness, commitment, and discipline were cultivated through a political education. It is obvious our desire for this country, a country that we worked very 56. hard to attain, is to be a developed nation where its citizens can live in peace and unity. To bring about this, it is going to require a clear vision, strong organization, steady struggle, and committed people. As in the hardships of war, in this testing period of peace and nation building, we need to come out victorious. For this, we will need to develop a political force that enhances the awareness and commitment of PFDJ members and the public, develop the unity of ideas and practices, and in general, one that has the capacity to make nation building a success. Particularly, in order to cultivate a new generation that is capable of carrying the responsibility of nation building, one that inherits the principles and values of the revolution, and one that has the commitment of the nation and its people, political education is paramount. The objectives of political education. The political education of the PFDJ has three major objectives: nationalism, social justice, and a conscious, committed, and active citizen. These objectives were the fundamental objectives of the People's Front since the time of the armed struggle, and it has been working for their attainment ever since. Since political education is a tool we use to cultivate an active citizen that has a national consciousness and commitment, one that fights for social justice, and one that has high moral values, it is a must that it be guided by these objectives. Through this, we can ensure the success of our fundamental objectives by nurturing a responsible, active, citizen who is faithful to his/her nation and people, one who is committed to the principles and values of the revolution, one who has developed a national common understanding, one who fights against oppression and injustice, and one that has a broad scientific outlook. We can elaborate these three major objectives of our political education as follows. A nationalism, understanding that Eritreans have fought and sacrificed a lot for their freedom and unity, cultivating Eritrean national identity. 57. Teaching the history of the Eritrean people, but particularly that of the liberation struggle, and noting the development and the internal and external challenges Eritrean nationalism faced and the unity that was built under this process through struggle and sacrifices, building national consciousness, understanding the past and ongoing struggle to build a national political system based on equality and participation of all citizens, guided by unity within diversity, fighting divisive and damaging subnational tendencies, enhancing national awareness that will challenge narrow and chauvinistic attitudes, understanding that in this globalized world it is not easy to ensure national interest, to defend sovereignty and national security, and that it requires a stronger effort and vigilance, building a solid national government that guarantees national interests and security, understanding the effort that was spent in building a constitutional political system that respects basic human rights, that is based on the rule of law, that shows no tolerance towards corruption, and one that operates in an accountable and transparent manner, and remembering the challenges it faced, understanding the importance of a strong constitutional system that is based on our national conditions, and one that will serve our national interests, because a common national understanding is a political foundation for national unity and harmony, doing away with destructive politics based on fear, hate, and confrontation, enhancing a political culture of common understanding and developing a constructive and responsible politics based on common interest and participation. Observing that a country that does not have citizens who take pride in their history and identity cannot achieve anything of substance, cultivating national self-esteem based on our history and culture. 58. B. Social justice, observing the meaning and need of social justice, and past and current struggles that were waged to bring about social justice and its challenges, understanding that implementation of social justice requires a long and complex process, properly identifying economic and social problems that need solutions, based on social justice at the level of low economic conditions, taking that the National Charter is the basic document of our vision and policies, observing the need of political democracy, and that it is part and parcel of social and economic democracy, explaining the effort that was to ensure social, the achievements, and the challenges and problems and options for their solutions, clarifying the preparation that is needed to ensure short and long-term plans, understanding the necessity of building a just institutional political system and administration that serves social justice, and is based on the participation of the citizens and is accountable to the public. Observing the need for a just economic system that brings about an equal development, one that is based on the participation and interests of the public, and one that improves the lives of people, and one that creates a national wealth. C. Conscious, committed and an active citizen, cultivating a citizen that is dependable and committed, and one who is confident in his history and identity, training a patriot that believes in the principles and values of the revolution, and one who works and fights and is also committed for their success, cultivating a nationalist citizen who believes and fights for the equality and participation of every sector of the Eritrean society. 59. And one who strengthens and defends the unity and harmony of the Eritrean people, building a mature citizen who has an open and broad-minded culture, one who has self-confidence and one who doesn't worship everything that comes from outside, producing a hard-working, promising citizen, one who loves work and knowledge, and one who has an ambition to improve himself/herself and his/her country, building an advanced citizen who believes in the equality and partnership of men and women, and one who has the common spirit and culture of cooperation. Producing a cultured citizen who obeys laws and rules, one who knows and keeps his/her rights and obligations, one who respects the rights and culture of others, and one who knows and respects universal human culture, training a citizen who respects the traditional cultures and values of our society, one who works to enhance the positive aspects of these cultures by rejecting their negative and harmful elements, building a citizen who does not tolerate all forms of discrimination, one who fights oppression and injustice, one who doesn't allow corrupt practices, one who sides with the oppressed and possesses a just conscience. 60. Conclusion. In this first book of regular political education, we have learned about different facets of political ideas that will be a basis for topics that will follow. We looked at topics on the meaning of and need for ideology and politics, the relationship between ideology and politics, the importance and role of ideology and politics in nation building in general, and in building Eritrea in particular, and towards the end we saw at the necessity and objectives of political education in post-independence Eritrea. From the lessons of this book, we have managed to underline the following basic issues: no history is made without ideology and vision, and that ideology is a basis for a strong society and effective organization that is capable of working for the survival and growth of its history. No society can secure its rights and interests without getting organized and developing its power. Politics as an art of organization and power is a key in building a stable government. No modern nation is built without developing ideological and political capacity, and it is clear that ideology and politics had and will have a decisive role in building and developing modern nations. The history of our revolution is proof that we would not have succeeded if we had not developed our national ideology of social justice, and politics of national liberation. The history of the Eritrean Revolution, by showing the power of a just cause and revolutionary ideas, the power of conscious, organized, and committed fighters has confirmed how critical ideology and politics are. Even today, the national ideology of social justice and national democratic politics are the foundation for nation building, the creation of economic development, and the basis for prosperous, just, and democratic modern Eritrea. 61. In independent Eritrea, as in the time of the revolution, political education is an important tool to infuse the public the right ideology and politics that will help us make history, and particularly to get the trust and commitment of our youth. We have discussed earlier that ideology and politics are not complete in themselves without the organization that changes them into a real power. Thus, we will continue our discussion with the second book in our series on regular political education, The Necessity and Objective of Organizing.